Hello and welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and recently I grew a beard. This chat is with Shawn Krause, who is originally from St. Louis. Now, Shawn went to CalArts, and he's a big CalArts fan, by the way, and after which he got hired at Pixar right before Toy Story kicked off. He then spent over 20 years being an animator and an animation supervisor at Pixar, where he worked on films like Toy Story, Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Up, and Soul. Now, recently he switched up gears and joined the team at Spire Studios as their creative director of animation and story. And in our chat, he's going to share some of the really interesting behind the scenes of what it was like working at Pixar in the early days and how he worked his way up to where he is now. So without further ado, let's jump in. Hi, Shawn. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great because we're talking. This is the highlight of my day.
This is fun.
Yeah, well, let's not waste any time and just jump into it. So you are like a Pixar veteran. You're working at this new studio Spire now, but tell me, where did baby Shawn, after he could walk and talk and learn to draw, how did he end up where he is talking to me right now on this podcast so many years later?
Well, I'm from St. Louis. I'm from the Midwest, and there wasn't a lot of, I loved animated films. The first film that I remember seeing as a kid, my mom took me to see Pinocchio, one of its re-releases, and that just made a huge impact on me. So there was something about it that I just was fascinated with. And I had one of those ViewMaster viewers.
Oh yeah.
And so you could kind of crank them forward or backward, and you could watch framing and timing and spacing, and it was just like the magic trick of why that was all working and fun. And I just got fascinated with that. So I would make little flip books, and then I saw Frank and Ollie. My parents would let me stay up sometimes and watch The Tonight Show. And so Frank and Ollie were on The Tonight Show and promoting The Illusion of Life. And I'm like, I got to get that book. And so there was very little, I think animation was kind of in a lull as an industry around the late 70s and early 80s. And when that came out, I just devoured that. I looked all through that constantly. And so it was kind of in the back of my head. I went into art. I studied art at the University of Missouri in Columbia, but I always wanted to do animation. So I was down at Disney, Florida, and they had the studio down there at the time, and they had I guess it was called the Fishbowl or something. And I just knocked on the glass because I saw someone walk by to get their attention, and so someone was. I wish I knew who it was because I'd thanked them, and they came to the door, and I said, I'm looking to, how do I get into this? And clearly they got this all the time, and they had a little piece of paper there. I'm like, here's this, but CalArts is the school to go to. And then it had Ringling on it, and it had all these other schools. They must have gone to CalArts too. So applied to CalArts, and that was like my entry. And like when I went to CalArts, it just felt like going home. It was just all the things that I was nutty and obsessed with and geeking out on. We all spoke the same language there. And so I was only at CalArts for a year, and it was a cool year. It was during the, well, it was terrible to have an earthquake, but because of the Northridge earthquake on the second half, the second semester, January to the end of the year, we weren't in the CalArts building. We went over to Lockheed, and it kind of bonded us all in that era and that generation. We were all there. I mean, Sanjay Patel was in my class, Mark Walsh, Stephen Gregory, Tasha was in my class, and so it was a nice, Bobby Podesta. So it was a real fun group of people that I've seen for many years and worked with at Pixar for many years. They were in that class, but we all kind of lived under our desks, and then that was the first year that previously CalArts would have their producers show in this tiny little theater in the building. And we couldn't do it in the building because the earthquake had messed up the campus. And so we had it actually away from there for the first time. They still do that to this day, I believe, where we'd had it at I want to say the Television Academy Museum screening room. So we all got to be there because in the old building, I heard that when you didn't see it all, only when your film came up, you could go in, listen to the reaction, then you'd leave, and the next kid would come in or student would come in. And
oh no.
So it was all producers in that room. It was so small, but now everyone could sit in the same theater and watch this together. So, and I remember I knew someone at the time who It happened in all departments. I think they let the music department go use resources down in Hollywood, and I knew someone who worked on the Jay Leno show, and so everyone really opened their doors to. I think Herb Alpert let the musicians come down there. Everyone really opened their doors to all the artists at CalArts. So it was a really exciting, interesting year in a lot of ways to be there. But I got into our producer show that year, and then sorry to back up just a little bit. My teacher, who was Larry White, who was our animation teacher, showed us the 5 Pixar short films, and they showed like the Luxo Jr. and they showed us Wally B and all the little things they had done. I knew nothing about Toy Story, but I just, when I saw that, it was like a lightning bolt went off. Like, because I'd always wanted to work at Disney, but when I saw those short films, it was like the Muppets meets Disney meets Warner Brothers, and so I was like, I got to work there. And so Pete Docter saw my film at the CalArts show, and he said, "Hey, you should come up and check it out." So I was in the short. I was in actually the commercials group at CalArts at Pixar at the beginning with Darla Anderson and
So
Jan
wait, you
Pinkava and Bob
you
Pearson.
quit school after 1 year because you got this opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, well, it was expensive for one thing.
Right,
So
right.
I was like, I need a job. So I had a short stint. I worked over the summer at a place called Creative Capers in Glendale, and then during that time, Pixar had been talking to me, and so when I went up there to meet them, I was like, oh, this is where I want
This
to
is
be.
it.
So
Have you ever regretted not finishing your degree or whatever you were pursuing, like all these years later?
yeah, I did because I wonder sometimes would I have done the same thing, or just I would have had that time to really figure out what was my true sensibilities, because I was just sort of at your first year. I feel like
Yeah.
you're just wanting to regurgitate and learn and do the things you'd seen done before, and how can I do that magic trick, how can I get my foot and understand this. And then I feel like the more years you go on, of course you're gonna. I wasn't working with sound yet even, so I didn't get to experience like asking someone in the music department to help and one of the actors to help. So it was all just my silent first film.
So
And
it was just
so,
a silent film.
well, it had music behind it, but
Okay.
there was no dialogue. But yeah, I loved the school so much. I would have loved to have gone back and done more in a lot of ways. But I think it's like when I started at Pixar, I would be jealous of the people who went to CalArts for 4 years, and then they would be jealous because I had a regular degree. I went to get a BFA from my first degree before I went to CalArts, and maybe they saw that as like they missed out on that. But I'm like, yeah, you didn't miss anything. But no, but it all added up. I think that all that time when I was doing painting and drawing at CalArts, or sorry, at Mizzou, that primed me. I didn't have to do as much learning. I had a little bit of the life drawing under my belt by the time I went into CalArts. So it helped me with the drawing part of it.
What do you think made your film stand out that Pixar, I mean, Pixar it wasn't the huge business it is now, but what do you think
Yeah.
made you stand out to them way back then in the early days?
I don't know. I mean, mine was very much in the vein of a Warner Brothers kind of like, a lot of blurred frames and, kind of like a dog and a kid missing his bike. So maybe it was because it was a full thought through animated film, and it was longer than some of them. So it was done for the most part. There's only, I think, two shots that I didn't finish. And it had some laughs, and so maybe just because it was, maybe because I was a freshman, there was something to lean into of like potential. I don't know, and so they took a chance, and and I think also we always in those early years, I don't think a lot of people. My impression was, not everyone was really believing in computer animation. So I imagine that they were searching for talent, so they were a little more. We always would say, if I showed what I did then now, I would not be working at Pixar, but it was good timing, and And I remember though, because when I was at Creative Capers and I was doing like, CD-ROM games. That's how long ago that was. When I was doing CD-ROM games, and I remember, it was one thing to do your own film and have it be a passion project of like changing things, but you would have a pose and then you change that pose. Well, you're doing all the in betweens as well. So it was a lot of work, and my drawing skills went way up, but it was exhausting. So I remember on the trip up when Andrew Schmidt showed me, um, look, here's a ball, and I can change the timing, and I was like, that's all free. All that spacing is free. I'm like, oh my god. So that was a big like plus to me, like, man. And then also the fact I think that it really appealed to me is that out of the gate, you were doing your work. Now I think by not having to be an in-betweener or an assistant or a cleanup artist, that's a lot of skills that you're not learning. But at the same time, we were animating our own scenes; they were on the screen, so it was too attractive to
Right.
turn. I want to learn the hard way. So, and I kind of got enough. I learned just enough to kind of know about it, but I never had to do timing charts. I never had to do those things. So I'm always in awe. Like I work with Mike Surrey at Spire, and I mean he was a great traditional animator, and Annie nominated, and so it's that whole generation, but especially the Nine Old Men's generation. They invented this thing that I still can't believe. I'm in such awe what they did and what they could do with timing, and not having the vocal to sit and just watch it live and adjust your dialogue and to get better and better. And we have so many ways that it's still challenging and difficult and amazing. I'm not taken away from what we do now with the computer, but the artistry involved in those early days was just mind-blowing to me. So I have a huge appreciation for all that.
Can you do timing charts now, or is it still a mystery to you?
Yeah, still. Well, I understand them, but I've never done them. No, I have never done a timing chart.
So tell me about your tenure at Pixar. You were there from the early days, just as started as I guess a junior animator, like fresh out of college, and then 20 something years later. Tell me about how that went, and like how did you when you started, like how did you learn all you needed to learn with 3D and get up to speed and all those things?
Well, I mean, what I will say, it was the luckiest break ever, and it's hard, it's hard work and it's timing and all that. But when I wanted to be an animator, I just wanted to have a job. I just loved it. I just wanted to do it. So to land at a place like Pixar, right at the big boom of it all, and not even know about Toy Story, the dumb luck of just going, I like what you do, yeah. And then, oh, you're making a movie, it's like, wow. So when I went up there, I think they were on a hiatus from hiring for the feature, and Darla Anderson was running the commercial group. So Darla and Corey Ray were producers in that group. Jan Pinkava, who directed, one of the directors of Ratatouille, before Brad came in. He was in the group. Bob Peterson, the hilarious Bob Peterson, who just did those Doug Day shorts and so many great characters at Pixar. He was in the group, and we were doing commercials. And so my first thing was like a Chips Ahoy commercial that I did with Bob, and I remember my storyboards were the most rendered, pencil painted, like photoreal looking boards. We still crack up on how much work we put into it to impress, and because I love doing it so much. So we did those, and then Darla was really, really phenomenal. I'm always grateful to her too, because, well, one, she hired me, and so I'm always grateful for that. But she, let me do my first kind of directing roles there, where Jan had done a Twizzler spot, and when it got to a point where we were kind of spinning our wheels on something, I added some ideas, and so through finishing it, she gave me a co-director role on that commercial, and then we were pitching some ideas for a Levi's Jeans for Women commercial, and they liked my idea. So Darla said, "Do you want to direct it?" So she gave me, two really great learning experiences when I was doing that. And so I was having a great time. And back then, Toy Story was under a different kind of company umbrella called High Tech Tunes, and so they were kind of separate doing their things, and Pixar was doing these commercials. And at a certain point, it was all hands on deck. So they said, "Do you guys want to come work on Toy Story?" And so I remember me and Bob were just like, "Yes, of course," So that was how we got kind of pulled into Toy Story. So we did layout, I think, for like 10 weeks, and then we got to do animation for 10 or 12 weeks until the film wrapped. So that was a huge experience. And then
What did you animate on Toy Story? Just curious.
I did the very beginning when the credits are on there, when you see like Andy's hand hold Woody out, and it's just his POV of the hand, and then gets whipped off. I did that, and then I did it was just kind of helping out and learning, like the army men had like crawled into the shrubs as the kids ran by and the ball's bouncing. I did the ball bouncing and the kids running down the hall. And then I did a scene with where Sid was like destroying Buzz, I think it was he's pulling him apart, and you only saw him from behind. And I think the whole thing got cut, or it got really truncated because it looked too violent, they said, for what was going on. And but I got off easy because I think Rich had one of the supervising animators had lead animators, directing animators had like a whole huge chunk of his work pulled out. But the sad thing is he couldn't even save it because his machine, called Bandits, crashed and all his scenes were gone. So it was a real shame because there was a lot of really great stuff he had done. So anyway, so I did a handful of shots. I think I did one in a bag that when they threw on the bed and they were inside the backpack. I remember how incredibly hard it was to animate a backpack, a real like floppy backpack, because we didn't have near the controls that we had now. I mean, even the hands of the characters' hands, we didn't have the opposable thumb. We had like a joint there, and so you couldn't do like a proper fist. And I don't think there was even shoulder either up, down, or forward or back. I don't, so it was like we had a lot of limitations to what we could do back then. Oh, and no driving system. That was a painful thing. I did a shot of the minivan pulling into the gas station, but the wheels aren't locked. So it was you could not have it not slide, and the wheel rotations matching the speed, and it was brutal.
Well, I didn't notice any of those things when I watched it when I was like 10 years old. So you did fine. so you start this at this new company called Pixar. You're working on commercials. It's fun and games. You get your first directing gig and you're really excited. Yep. And then all that pays off and you start working on Toy Story. Did it ever become like, this sounds like fun and games, but when did the hard work and like all that perseverance and stuff kick in for you?
Well, I mean, honestly, it was never hard work. It was always
never mind.
I mean, it was hard to do. It was challenging, but it was from day one. I mean, it was like, but you didn't. I think that's one of the reasons places like Pixar and Disney and DreamWorks do so well, is that everyone, you kind of gather overachievers. And not to say I'm an overachiever, but you love what you do so much that you're just, I slept at work many times because I just wanted to get better. I just wanted to see,
like overnight,
obsessed on it. Oh yeah. I mean, you stay there because you're just obsessed. And so so it was always hard, but it wasn't ever an issue or problem.
Well then give me some highlights from your career at Pixar, like some things that stand out to you, and maybe also some big learnings that you experienced too in terms of animation and storytelling and performance.
Well, I remember just reaching back, like what I know initially, and this might hold true, I think, to how people work now too, and especially for people who might be coming in, because it's the one thing I did miss, and I don't have a lot of experience. I drew for so long, and I would do flip books, and I animated a bunch at CalArts and then at Creative Capers. But what I remember is the visceral feeling of your head and connecting to your hand and the energy of a line you're choosing to draw. That was the one thing that I did miss about that direct connection that you have to that feeling. That it's more like animating with mitts on, because you're removed from this thing. Like when I talk to Mike, he says, one of the things, the best things about doing that is when you draw a character, it's your drawing. It's like you can always draw. You always have that. So when we draw our thumbnails for Joy or Molt or whoever, you're not going to render it just like the what you saw on the screen. The computer's so detailed. So you do a shorthand version of it, and you're not. No one's ever going to look at your drawing and go, "Oh my God, that's Joy." They might recognize the graphic image of it, but it's different than drawing Pinocchio. It's so. What I would say is that one of the things that I remembered was going in, and I used to kind of get really specific and lock down a lot of frames. I could do a hand pose here and a gesture here, and I want to get this arc, so I'd put it here, and I put a lot of knots down on a frame. So you have a linear knot representing X, Y, and Z values, and when those combination of things give you your shape for what you're doing. And so they're like bell curves you're messing with. And I remember just getting to a point where I was so frustrated with changing things, I just started to strip out anything that looked kind of extraneous. And I was shocked that it actually played better even than all those specific notes. So it was a big aha moment to go, oh, just be really clever and smart about how you want to time this, or you don't need to get microscopic with your details for these poses unless you're doing something very purposeful for an
so
effect.
You're saying like think less about the like in between poses where you're like micromanaging what's happening versus like more of a freestyle loose.
Well, it's always make it simplify as much as you can, because the more noise you got going on if you're using splines, or if you're just breaking down everything, there's going to be hitchiness in what you're doing, or it might take away from the freshness of what you're doing. It was just a moment where I learned I didn't have to put down a pose on every frame. It was it would play out differently. And I will say that I don't know how much, this is seriously, I don't know how much modern students or people coming in think about spacing the same way someone who, like, I learned just enough to kind of know about it, timing and spacing and all that. And if you're relying on your splines or everything, you're going to get a swimminess, I think, to things. So I think it's helpful to think about things in a frame way, because it's going to give you those impacts that you want to feel, or snappiness or a pop that you want to feel. If you try to smooth everything out, it's going to feel kind of muddy. So sometimes we stop talking about frames in dailies, I found. And I think that's important to always remember where this came from,
So what would be an example? Like in dailies, you're like, by frame 10, I want 10 frames. By frame 100, I want the impact. And then frame 150, I want like a settle, like instead of.
Well, I think it's more like the most specific one I can think of is when you have like a slow out or a slow in or whatever. You can do it with a spline of a bell curve.
Yeah.
But sometimes you want to have a really specific crescendo, like break to it, or you hit something and have a reverb. And so it's just sometimes it's just always great to kind of think about that, because it might be better in those frames if you kind of get a little more detailed, or think of it in a way of like you're shooting this and you have to think of frames. It's not just flowing live on a camera.
That makes sense because it
gives a nice texture to it.
Yeah, I get the swimminess comment now that you made. In the same light, are there things like, you've been animating for so long and character performances and things like that? Are there things that you make sure to include to make something seem more alive to the audience, or give it like a more real feeling versus, we're just looking at shapes on a computer that are playing back? And I think there's like a difference between like okay animation and good animation, and then like chef's kiss animation, you know? So are there
Hmm.
things in that chef's kiss animation that's give it that life?
Uh, well, I mean, well, okay. One thing that Mike and I talk a lot about is that um, we feel there's a limit to how much reference someone should lean on. Like it's
Mm.
great to shoot reference, and everyone uses it, and everyone does it. But at times we'll see people um, just going straight by the reference, or an idea that because something looks natural or something looks realistic, as impressive as that illusion or trick is, it's about exaggeration. It's about caricature, and so um, it's Ward Kimball is as wonderful look at his stuff as is to look Frank Thomas's or Milt Kahl's or whoever you want to say. I'm just using those guys because those are the guys I looked at. But it's great to vary and put in extreme stuff too, but just be restrained about it and also have naturalism in there. One's not better than the other. It's just when is it appropriate, and it gives it texture. And so a lot of times I would shoot reference and I would just chop it up to the bits I liked. I wouldn't try to do the straight performance and just copy what I did. And not that people are always doing that, but I would do that. And then there's just going to be things in between that you can't reference, like action things or scramble or you hit the wall just the right way that looks good versus you just hitting a wall and trying to copy that. So it's always like just because something is you can shoot reference for it doesn't mean you should just only do that. Even when they 2D animators would trace. I think again, think of Illusion of Life. They had actors dancing. They wouldn't just trace it. They would use it as a reference, and then they would exaggerate on top of it, and that made it not feel like you're just rotoscoping something, and it's very dry and clinical. So it just gives that spark to it that feels like you're not just watching. It's like photorealistic painting versus impressionist painting.
Right.
So
Okay, that
so that,
makes
yeah, that's
sense.
yeah.
It's
So
like
that's
it's like shoot the reference video, but use your judgment on when to use it based on the senior or the story that you're animating. And don't
yeah.
forget exaggeration, because that's what animation is about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did a shot of Joy in Inside Out that I had a lot of fun doing, and I always wanted to kind of make if I could, my thought on those characters was always kind of don't just try not to only do like a cartoony scramble because we know how to do that, but in this case it was a cartoony scramble. But like, could you find ways to kind of have their energy inform the performance because it felt right, not because I've seen it done before. And in this case, it was a little bit of that. She goes, "Oh, I know how to fix that." And she scrambles over a chair, but she's moving. So when she's talking really quick, you're never going to see her face. And I had her fingers doing this. And for me, that kind of the finger bits felt like her talking. So visually, it felt like the chat that she was talking still. And so I just kind of liked the way that felt exaggerated.
Yeah, I like that example too, because it's like, it's a very visual performance, and it comes across like perfectly. That's a good example. Why don't we chat about why you decided to, leave your career at Pixar and go to Spire? Like, what was the decision process in that, and why?
Well, it wasn't easy. I loved
Yeah.
Pixar and I loved working there and it was fantastic. But I think, um, you get to a point where you want to grow and do more. And I would think I was feeling like by the time I'd hit Inside Out, certainly you can always learn more and more about animation, or being a better animator. But I'd kind of scratched that itch. And
So where were
when
you? Where were you at the point of Inside Out? Like, what you were a supervisor, you were animator, you were director of
yeah.
all of Pixar. Like,
No. So I saw about in like 2007 or 8, I want to say, Up was my first time I was brought up to a directing animator.
yeah.
So for Pixar, I was directing animator and then supervising animator. So I was a directing animator on Up, and then I was a directing animator or supervising animator on Cars 2, and then I continued and was a supervising animator on Inside Out, And so I had done the leadership role a few times, and even before that, I had done theme parks. I always loved the theme parks, so I had directed a couple, or helped direct some of the theme park projects. So I had a lot of leadership that I had done over the 10 years or so, and it was great. It was wonderful, but especially on Inside Out, we were doing the most push stuff and subtle human animation we were looking at and exploring. So when you start to get in the leadership roles, you're starting to see bigger part of the process. You're starting to see like you're talking to the story team more. You're not thinking about your shot anymore. You're thinking about the arc of a film. You're thinking about sequences, and then you're starting to think of the big picture more. And along with hopefully trying to help bring the best out in people and support the team you're with, but also get the director what he needs for the screen. So I started to go from really wanting to see my performance on the screen to not needing that. My sense of satisfaction came out of my contribution to the film, but it also started to look at the storytelling aspect more from a cinematic way and a storyline way than a character moment, even though it's all rooted in character. And so that started to pull me that way. And I think at first I just didn't know what to think about. I wasn't in touch, with that sense, like, what am I feeling? I love animation. I'm an animator, So when I started to get pulled that way, it was strange. And you built a career in one direction.
Yeah.
And when you kind of accomplish more than you ever thought you would accomplish or knew you where you'd wind up, how do you set your compass to the next challenge, especially in a very large studio, because there's one, will your salary be the same if they let you go do something else? How does that work? How does that transition work? How are you going to be okay to be, older than people who are coming in and doing this and are really great at this, and that's what they've done, and you're learning this, but you've been there for that long, and there's all kinds of like things to navigate, and that didn't bother me. As I had fun. They let me go into the story a little bit and work on that, and we contribute in different ways over the years, and we certainly give notes on screenings and all that. But it was like, should I go and be a story person, go in and do storyboards and all that, and what's that transition like, and will I be as successful at that as I was at the other thing? So anyway, that's when I started to kind of feel that was scary and exciting at the same time, because you're giving up something that you've succeeded at too. And but I just knew that I was just kind of getting a little antsy. And so, like anywhere, the higher you go, into the pyramid, if you want to direct, everybody wants to direct, right? And so there's only a few runways, but there's a lot of really deserving, talented people that want to do the same thing. So I think for me, I just felt like, the only way that I can really make a clean break and do this is to kind of make that happen. And so
not wait for something to open up at Pixar specifically.
Yeah,
you
should
look for an opportunity where you can move into that right away.
Yeah, and I would say that's a mistake of mine too. Like one, I think mindfulness. I just didn't have the mindfulness, to use a more modern term for it, to know that hey, eventually I'm going to want to do more. I have these interests, and so the big lesson is like, don't wait. Start doing that stuff. Start making your thing. Start putting those down. Those ideas. Write your stuff. Don't just think I'm going to do this one thing. Always keep working on all of your skills that you were doing. And that's why, like for CalArts, for instance, if I had stuck around and went there 3 more years, would I have fallen in love then with the story side? Because I knew about the animation side from just messing around with it. Yeah. And at my time at Pixar, I learned about story, taking Robert McKee's class, and Joe Ranft he did a class for us early on, like a Bug's Life era, where he taught us, and we got to do storyboards with him. And so it'd always been bits of it, but I didn't continue on my own. So and then drawing skills. I didn't really draw every day like I used to draw. So all this stuff is like starting the engine up, warming the engine up again, like getting back into it. So anyway, so I was just getting to that point where I'm like, okay, how do I do this? And then you're trying to navigate a system and keep your career going. And it just became apparent to me that I should start thinking about how I'm going to make this happen. And so I started to look at every option, and when I talked to Brad Lewis, I'd reached out to him once because, again, I knew him from Cars 2, and my kids were obsessed over the How to Train Your Dragons series, especially my daughter. So when I saw he was directing on that, I said, or producing on that, on 3, I said, this is fantastic, congratulations, we'll be the first in line. And we started talking, and he said, oh, bring him by, so I went to say hi to him, and that kind of started that conversation over a period of time. And then eventually it just got to the point where I said, I'm looking to grow, and so we talked about what we could do. And so that's kind of how I got there. And when I saw what they were building in their track record, and I know Brad, and I saw the other people that they were, talking about getting, that it just felt like this is a really wonderful thing. And because the whole goal was to kind of take all the best stuff about the studio systems he's worked in everywhere, I think, and use the best part of that, but now try to tie it into a modern way of making films, with modern, resources and COVID vetted ways of working at home.
Well,
So,
I want you to do like a little like closed notes on what Spire is, but would you say that, your career is based off of getting opportunities and just jumping on them and then seeing them through? Because it sounded like maybe not regrets, but you wish you had started this directing story path a little earlier, or had, like you said, mindfulness along the way more, but maybe
yeah.
wouldn't have had the career you did if you were splitting your mind between these two things and trying to make it in this one area while, doing your day job in the other area. You wouldn't be sleeping over at Pixar. Just so maybe, so
Yeah.
how would you, if you were to go back and do it over again, how would you tell Shawn to do it over again, I guess? If you even want to. I mean, it sounds like you're ending up in a pretty good place that you intentionally want.
Yeah. I don't. I think the only thing I would probably tell myself is, it's just always going to be great to like continue your passion projects on the side. Don't like the thing was, we just loved what we did, and we were all friends, and so it was just like we were all in it for that film, and so we just obsessed. So I don't know what I would. I mean, probably just
You'd be a
I
traitor
would
if
just
you
say,
were working on your own stuff at home.
well, and you get, well, and I will say too, there's something to be said about, I think one of the challenges was being up here was great, but it was also, there was always this, pluses and minuses to both. And you can't regret it. I don't really regret it. It's more of a sense of like, how could I
now
do something better?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I know, how would I do it better? And so um part of it was that you were in this wonderful place, but you start to kind of just have that way of doing it. And I would start to see people come in, and they would bring new ideas because they've been in different places, and you start to envelop those ideas. So one of the great things now is that I'm seeing is that I'm talking to everyone out there, and you're seeing the full scope of what is going on. So I think people who were working in LA probably bounced around a bit more. And I think every time you you take those risks and those challenges, you learn something. You kind of, you grow,
Expands
through
your
that.
consciousness even in that area. Yeah, definitely.
So they're both great. They're both ways are great.
So tell me about Spire. Like, what exactly is Spire trying to do now that you just joined, and hopefully this is the thing that you love and can see through your passion. What is Spire? Tell me about this.
Well, we hope to be a boutique studio, and making our own films, original films. And a lot of studios will do it the front end only. We're doing animation as well, with our own team. And so we want, one of the big things we're trying to do is not have the overhead of, what are ways to be more cost effective and to make films for a modern way of the industry is working now with streaming, and hopefully we'll get theatrical runs. That's definitely something we want to do, is have some sort of theatrical run. But how can we lean into, cut the bloat, cut the waste stuff we do, and get in there. So one of the things is the Unreal Engine. A lot of people are tapping into this now. So we're hoping to do the same thing and find a way to crack that way of working more effectively, more collaboratively. And part of the challenge is that how do you all work together without moving the ground under each other's feet? So how can you do that in a smart way? So you kind of have to tiptoe in that. So we're doing that. The idea is to have our machines like use a cloud-based machine kind of session. So we won't have it all here. We'll have it somewhere else. And
so that you don't have like a big office space for everybody working. Everybody's working from home
right now, because right now we don't have our crew up yet. There's only like a handful of us now that are working together, and we're somewhere in LA. I'm in the Bay Area, so somewhere here.
Is a goal right now is to like sell to a broadcaster or a streaming network, like a feature film idea, and get the funding to start producing one?
Well, we have two films out now that we have scripts for, and so they're Brad's showing them around, and it's the idea is to kind of partner with somebody, but not to give away creative control as much as possible, and have the ability to make really great films we believe in, and have I think of the Disney Pixar model of working together that Steve always got going, and that was a good relationship. And so can we find something similar? And we're just right now we're building, and so we were not even going to really start building up on the animation side till probably late in the year or next year. So right now we're just getting into building our story teams, and putting our boards together, and so that's all going full steam ahead as we look to make these films. And so,
well, congratulations. Also, that sounds exciting and very scary, because starting a new studio, I mean, you're a bunch of super talented people, so I'm sure that's got a lot of clout in the industry. Well, it's been amazing listening to your career and journey. Is there anything else that you wanted to share as we're wrapping up here?
No, this is great. It's always fun, and I'm hopefully this got some people listening got something out of this. I mean,
well, I did.
It's nice to look back to.
That's all that matters to me.
Well, good.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Shawn. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and all the best with Spire and this new career path. I think that's really cool that you realized what you wanted to do, took a strategic path and the risk to do it, and now you're well on your way. I think that's awesome.
Well, thanks, Terry. It was so nice of you to have me, and always enjoyed talking.
Excellent. All right. Well, all the best. Take care. The music for this podcast was composed by Will Farmer, and the graphics by Daniel Abensauer. I encourage you to look them up if you enjoyed their work.